Do you remember when people used to disappear? Not in some dramatic, movie-worthy way. Not because of a fight or a fallout. They just moved, switched schools, got a new job in another state. And unless you had their home phone number written down somewhere in a notebook, that was it. They faded into memory. You carried them quietly. There was no digital trace to revisit. No archived photos to scroll through at 1 a.m. Just the version of them your mind preserved. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you exist in a strange in-between space. Researchers sometimes call it a microgeneration. Not fully Gen X, not fully Millennial. You're what some have labeled a Xennial. And there's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes with that identity. It's not physical fatigue. It's not even emotional burnout in the typical sense. It's chronological exhaustion. You feel older than you are because you've lived through two completely different eras of human existence in less than 50 years. You are a biological bridge between the analog world and the digital one. And holding those two realities in the same nervous system creates friction most people can't quite articulate. Here's what makes you different. You still feel a reflexive jolt when a landline rings, even though you rarely answer unknown calls. You know how to read a paper map without panic. Yet if your GPS glitches for 10 seconds, you feel strangely disoriented. You show up 5 minutes early to meetings because you grew up in a world where on time meant you were already late, and there was no texting, running behind. You probably still keep a notebook, maybe a pen you actually like. Not because you're anti-technology, but because your brain trusts ink. There's something about the tactile friction of writing that feels grounded in a way a cloud-based app never quite does. You organize your digital files into carefully labeled folders because you remember when finding something meant physically opening drawers and flipping through paper. You buy physical books you love because a small part of you doesn't entirely trust that servers and subscriptions will last forever. You rehearse conversations in your head before walking into a store, not out of social anxiety, but from a residual efficiency learned in a time when every interaction was live, unedited, and irreversible. You look at a sunset and feel the instinct to capture it. Then almost immediately, you feel tired at the thought of posting it. Psychologists have begun describing this state as living on the analog-digital cusp. It's not nostalgia. It's cognitive duality. You're maintaining two operating systems in one brain. Research on developmental psychology shows that the environment you inhabit between roughly ages 12 and 22 wires your expectations about how the world works. For you, that developmental window was split in half. Your early adolescence was pre-digital. Your early adulthood was saturated with the internet. That split created something unique. A high internal locus of control layered over a tolerance for uncertainty. If this moved you, comment 9 right now. If it didn't, comment 0. Your voice matters. Take 1 second and share it. In your early years, if you wanted information, you went to the library. If you wanted to see someone, you showed up where you said you would. If you got lost, you figured it out. Outcomes were directly tied to your effort, memory, and follow-through. Then the digital shift happened. Information became instant but unreliable. Connection became constant but thin. Your brain had to graft a new system onto the old one, and that fusion created permanent cognitive dissonance. You long for the stability of the analog world while competing in the volatility of the digital one. Attachment theory intersects here too. Many Xennials developed a kind of secure avoidant hybrid pattern. You know how to exist offline. You can be bored without unraveling. You can fix things, wait for things, sit with silence. But you're wary of the hypervisibility and surveillance baked into modern social platforms. You remember anonymity. You remember being unreachable. And that memory changes how you experience the present. The aging sensation you feel isn't just about technology accelerating. It's about the transformation of utility itself. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, technology was a tool. You sat at a desktop computer. You completed a task. You logged off. The device was a destination. Today, technology is ambient. It surrounds you. It doesn't wait to be used. It uses you. Your data, your attention, your reactions become fuel for algorithms. You're acutely aware of this shift because you remember when the internet felt like a place you visited, not an ecosystem you lived inside. Younger generations don't carry that comparison. They have no baseline for sustained silence. Older generations often dismiss the digital world as optional, but you can't fully opt out. You build the systems. You manage the workflows. You troubleshoot your parents' Wi-Fi and explain privacy settings to your kids. You're the translator between two worlds, and translation is exhausting. This is the core contradiction of your identity. You're self-sufficient, yet quietly craving relief. Digitally fluent, yet nostalgically drained. Independent because you had to be, but worn thin by the constant demand for your attention. You're skeptical of trends, yet you're the one everyone calls when something breaks. Your self-reliance came from childhood afternoons when no one knew where you were, and that was normal. You solved problems alone. You entertained yourself. You tolerated boredom. Your digital fluency came from entering adulthood at the exact moment the internet promised connection, efficiency, and endless possibility. You can hold both realities, but holding both has weight. There's a subtle grief embedded in the Xennial experience, the loss of forgetting. You grew up in the final era where mistakes were ephemeral. Your teenage embarrassments weren't archived. Your early heartbreaks weren't searchable. Your awkward phases lived in memory, not metadata. Now you exist in a world where permanence is default. That awareness breeds hypervigilance. You monitor your digital footprint while remembering when footprints were simply impressions in dirt. You mourn the patience boredom once cultivated. Long afternoons without stimulation forced imagination, forced reflection, forced growth without witnesses. You feel older because you're grieving a version of humanity that allowed evolution in private, and you're doing it while the world accelerates without pausing to acknowledge what was lost. But here's the reframe. Chronological exhaustion isn't dysfunction. It's competence under pressure. You operate as a living index of two distinct cultural systems. You understand deep focus in an age of fragmentation. You know stability is constructed offline. You can navigate digital complexity while preserving analog values. Bridges are built to bear weight. That's their function. The heaviness you feel isn't premature aging. It's pattern recognition across discontinuous eras. You lived through a phase transition in human history and retained fluency in both states. That perspective is rare. It allows you to see gains and losses simultaneously. It allows you to recognize that progress isn't linear, and convenience has trade-offs. You're not lagging behind. You've simply traveled across two cognitive landscapes while others only know one. The exhaustion is real. But so is the skill. You are not confused about where you stand. You're aware of how much the ground has shifted, and that awareness feels like age. But it's actually depth. You are not an old millennial or a late Gen Xer. You are the keeper of a transition that will never occur again in the same way. A generation raised in analog adolescence and matured in digital adulthood. That dual environment cognition isn't weakness. It's adaptive complexity. You understand what it means to be unreachable and hyperconnected, to write letters and send emails, to memorize phone numbers and reset passwords. You carry both. The world may interpret that as weariness, but it's something else. It's integration. You don't feel older because you're deteriorating. You feel older because you recognize patterns others haven't lived long enough to see. You're not behind. You've simply seen more. And bridges don't complain about the weight they carry. They endure it, because without them, nothing crosses. Maybe that's the part no one tells you about being the bridge. Bridges don't get to choose one side. They don't get to live entirely in the past or fully surrender to the future. They hold both. They absorb tension. They stretch across distance so others can move freely. And that quiet strength often goes unnoticed. If you felt older than your age, not in your body but in your mind, maybe it's not because you're worn out. Maybe it's because you remember. You remember a slower pace. You remember privacy. You remember when silence wasn't something to escape from. And at the same time, you've mastered a world that never stops updating. That's not weakness. That's range. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like this video so more people in this in-between generation can find it. Share it with someone who might be carrying the same invisible weight. And subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of growing up between worlds. You're not behind. You're just carrying more than most people realize.